Good morning, students. I'm outside on a beautiful morning, May 31st, and that's Mole Hill behind me there. You can hear the birds singing. It's just a really nice morning. Thought I'd come out here and read you chapter 5 in A Drop of Mercy. Let's get right into it. The puddle at the base of the back stoop stretched too far to jump. Heinrich stepped into it, shivering as his bare feet met cold water. At least the rain had stopped. He followed his father's voice to find his family behind the barn. The newly transplanted hedges had been pushed aside, and the rough-hewn door to the hidden cave swung wide. An open cask of cider lay on its side before the door, still spilling drops of the precious liquid onto the ground. The discarded skin from an entire round of cheese lay nearby, the cheese nowhere in sight. "They found it," Heinrich said. "Yeah," his father said, stepping from the cave into the muted light of the early morning. "And they left little enough for us." Heinrich inspected the yard. The soldiers' camp was as he had seen it last night, though puddles of brown water now surrounded each rough shelter. Shovels and cookware lay strewn around a sodden fire pit in the midst of the camp. They took the food, but they left their gear. "That means they'll be back," Dottie said. "We need to get as much as we can indoors before they do. Firewood, apples, all the vegetables that haven't been harvested yet, even the chickens." "The chickens?" Klaus said. "We'd bring the cow in too if she'd fit, but that would only bring them in after her, I fear. Heinrich, grab the wheelbarrow. I want you to divide the wood as best you can and stack some beside each fireplace. Be sure to leave out some here for the soldiers. Klaus, take the chickens to the back parlor. You might put them in an empty turnip bin for now. We'll fix something better for them later. Nell, I'd like you to see to the kitchen. Bring in everything you can. We can cook what we need in the parlor and cart the rest back out here as we need to. I'll be along in a while to help with the heavier stuff." He sighed. "It's a real shame it is. We would have shared if they'd have asked." Mom patted his back but said nothing. "Why'd they do it?" Klaus asked, as he and Heinrich headed for their respective assignments. "'Cause they're soldiers." "But Daddy was sharing with them." "Sharing's not good enough for some people." The woodpile was 5 feet tall, if it was an inch, and several layers deep. Heinrich was almost glad for the challenge of moving it all. It would give him something physical to work out his rage. How dare they steal from his father, of all the men in the world, and him as willing to give away his last crust of bread as to eat it himself. He hoped they never came back. He hoped they tripped into Logan's swamp and were sucked into the abyss with their packs full of stolen good to weigh them down. How dare they? He had barely piled the second load of wood into the wheelbarrow when he heard sobs from the kitchen. He found his father holding his mother, a rare sight in their normally reserved home. "But I can't get any more," she said through her tears. "All that's left is the corn, and when that's gone, I won't be able to bake anything." "We've got the vegetables still, and all those beautiful apples. Why, if we had to, we could make apple pie and pretend it was bread." Mom smiled sadly. "It takes flour to make pie, too." Heinrich looked at the barrel of flour resting on the ground beside his parents. Sure enough, the side against the wall was dark and shiny, as though it had absorbed a bucketful of last night's rain. "I'm sorry I didn't fix the roof when you asked me to," Dottie said. "You had so many things on your mind. But you should be the first thing on my mind, and I should have listened to you. Will you forgive me?" "I already have." "I thank you. Then may I give you a job for the day? I want you to rake the coals and mix all the flour you can into loaves. Bake it all up, and we'll store as much in the house as we think it'll keep for a while. Bake 'em hard as sea biscuits if that'll help. Then we'll eat what we can and give away the rest. What do you say?" "I say it's a good plan, Abram Groff." Mom tilted her head and smiled up at him. "And you'll fetch me the wood?" "Of course, my dear." "And build up the fire?" Dottie bowed. "Anything for you, my dove." Heinrich blushed and stepped quietly back to the woodpile before he heard any more. The army returned later that evening, or most of it did. A few thousand soldiers stayed behind to hold Philadelphia, as they said, but the Groff's lieutenants came back with the bulk of the army. While Dottie went across the road to find Captain Crawley, Heinrich confronted Nat Shaw. "You're back soon." "There wasn't much to do," Nat said. He slouched on his log and stretched his toes toward the fire. "The rebels ran off when they heard us coming. We marched through the town, waved at a few welcoming chaps, and marched back here." "Then why'd you take all the food?" Heinrich demanded. A puzzled frown creased Nat's face. "I beg your pardon?" "The cave, that was all we had." "I'm sorry, but I don't know what cave you're referring to." "Oh, come on, 'twas plain as day with the hedges ripped from the ground and the cider barrel tipped over. At least you might have saved what you didn't want. Spilling on the ground like that." Nat stood and held his arms out to his sides. "I assure you we plundered no cave." Heinrich stomped off behind the barn. Nat followed. "Then how do you explain this?" Heinrich asked. "I don't know what happened here. We retired immediately after supper and departed early this morning. We had time for neither exploring nor feasting." "Right." Heinrich turned back toward the house. "What a bunch of liars these British were. At least the militia had the decency to steal to your face." He met Dottie coming into the yard with Captain Crawley. "Well, show me the cave," the captain was saying. Heinrich followed the two men back to the cave, where Nat now stood with a few of his fellow soldiers. They looked up at their commander with open faces. Captain Crawley made a cursory inspection of the damage and addressed his men. "Would one of you care to explain this?" he asked. The men looked at one another with hunching shoulders and shaking heads. They sure looked innocent. Nat spoke. "We were together through supper, sir, and I had trouble sleeping after that, so I would have heard if anyone had stirred. Other than a few quick trips to the bushes, they slept like logs, every one of them." Captain Crawley scanned the men's faces. They all nodded in apparent innocence. Then he turned to Dottie. "I don't know who broke into your supplies, Mr. Groff. Perhaps it was some of the camp women. They have been known to do such things. In any case, I believe these men are telling the truth. I have a proposal that may remedy the situation as well as solve a problem of my own. My company has a supply of flour, but few bakers or ovens to bake it into loaves. You say you have a wife. I assume she can bake? Better than the baker. Do you think she would bake for us in exchange for a few loaves of her own?" "How many loaves?" "Well," said the captain, "what would you say if, for every 100 pounds of flour I give you, she returns me 100 pounds of bread?" Dottie looked confused. "And what will she receive in return?" The captain grinned. "Ah, you see, 100 pounds of flour swells to 150 pounds of dough, which, after baking, yields 125 pounds of bread loaves. Your wife could keep the extra 25 pounds, and I will have bread where I only had flour before. 25 pounds is a lot of bread." "That it is, and it's a generous offer for you to make. She will gladly bake your bread." The men shook hands on the deal, and the captain left the yard. Heinrich looked at Nat. "Sorry for accusing you. I never pictured women stealing." "I think it's more likely that militia were here. They're a rascally bunch." "Don't I know it," Heinrich said. "They'd steal milk from a baby and smile when it cried." "Some of them would make fine soldiers, I believe, if they'd join a proper company. Some 200 or 300 rushed us on the road this morning. It didn't account for much, but then it's hard to face the king's best with sticks and axes." "That's a lot of nerve." "Aye, they're like angry hornets, these rebels. You swat one in front and 3 more sting you from behind." In the gathering dusk, the two young men returned to the fire pit. Heinrich sat down and began whittling on a chip of wood. "What made you become a soldier?" Heinrich asked as Nat settled beside him. Nat's eyes sparkled. "I wanted to do something that mattered, something to be proud of." "I don't think I could kill," Heinrich said. "I didn't either, till my mates were threatened. Then there was no thinking needed, you just act." "What about Paoli Tavern?" Heinrich asked. "That wasn't about defending your mates." Nat poked at the fire pit and sat silent for a long time. "Soldiering's not all bad," he said at last. "When those ladies in Philadelphia waved their handkerchiefs and huzzaed for us this morning, my heart swelled into my throat. That's what we came for, to help people." He stirred the coals again. "Well, things aren't always the way you imagine they will be." That ends chapter 5. I'll be away for a week. I'm going traveling, but I expect to get chapter 6 up on schedule next week as well. If something happens look for it. It'll be coming in. It might just mean that I have a little trouble getting internet or cell where I'm going. Hope you guys have a great week. See you later. Bye.